Good evening. I am your Svengali man of the people in my parents' sprawling country estate, Dominic Bliss, advising an erratic, lazy, pathological liar unsuited for high office, who nonetheless rules over us like a god and defends the indefensible with consummate ease, Boris Large. And we're back with a very topical edition of Lockdown Large. As you know, we're presenting this under quarantine conditions, which most of us have adhered to with no issue. Mike under the influence, as you can see. Most of us have adhered to with no issue, but clearly there are exceptions, as includes the man who's dominated the news cycle for the last, 3 or 4 days now? And it looks like he's going to dominate it for quite some time, judging by the Prime Minister's response to the clamour for him to resign. So, Mike, I thought we'd discuss because obviously there's so much to discuss, the Dominic Cummings debacle. I think the reason being, Mike, that this is one of those political stories that is not just of interest to political anoraks. It actually affects the average everyday man and woman because of what the actions represent. If you get me.
Yeah.
Before we get into that, Mike, how are you doing on lockdown? You had an okay week? No disasters or triumphs?
Definitely no triumphs. No. You know what? Yeah, it's been a right week. Not too bad. By lockdown standards. So, I mean, everything's judged slightly differently these days, isn't it? So what previously would have been perceived as it was a good week, now doesn't exist. So just not completely shit now becomes a good week, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, that's true.
So,
don't forget
not
though,
been
Mike.
the best.
Don't forget though, Mike. I guess it was last week technically, but you know we took advantage of the easing of lockdown, didn't we? It's the first time in how long I had a kickabout with my new football with my cohort Mike Large. We socially distanced of our local field. I had some pot shots in a goal. Mike, being as tardy as he normally is, led to me just drilling a ball a few times by myself, and stupidly I overexerted myself. Went for a complete twat of a free kick with the outside of my foot and horrendously pulled my right quadricep just seconds before Mike deemed it necessary to arrive.
Yeah. See, unbelievable. That is so typical Aaron Bliss. That is couldn't just say I did something stupid. I had to try and drag someone else into or blame them for it.
Well,
it's my fault he hurt himself, guys. Remember that.
I'm learning well from the Prime Minister. It's always someone else's fault. But to be fair, Mike, you were an arsehole for showing up nearly 20 minutes late. But, of course, it was my fault. I was too compulsive. I didn't engage my brain and think, you haven't played proper football for I don't know how many years. You've very mildly stretched. Is it a good idea to be taking a fucking huge run up and walloping this ball with muscles that you haven't used to any extent in the best part of a decade? And it wasn't a good idea. And, you know, on that subject, I repeated the kind of thoughtless stupidity tonight when I returned a book to my top bookshelf, which is above where I'm broadcasting from. It's just up here. I had to return it to the top shelf, and rather than thinking it through and thinking, let's do this right, get a step ladder, slide it back in, no, of course, I decided to shift my laptop to one side, stand on the desk, reach over, and of course there was a crunch, and fortunately the desk is still intact, but not entirely. So part of it has decided to come away from its mountings on this side of the desk. I'm going to have to use some probably seriously strong glue to try and salvage what I can of it. But
I imagine that was probably someone else's fault, wasn't it? Though, like,
I think I did call your name.
Yeah,
that was my first response.
Yeah. If Mike hadn't been late for good fucking reason, may I add, didn't add that bit, did you? If Mike hadn't been late the other day, I wouldn't have stood on the. Yeah.
No, I've got no excuse. It was some 3 or 4 hours before I was meant to do this, so it's all on me. Unlike Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson, I'm prepared to hold my hands up this time and say, "Act like a puffin. I'm going to say sorry, and I'm going to move on."
This time.
Next time, I think it's going to be you again.
Right. Okay.
So. Well, anyway, I'm paying the price, aren't I, Mike? Because I probably won't be able to play football properly, at least the whole of next week. The week after, I'm probably only going to be able to go in goal. So, I've paid the price for my foolhardy manoeuvre. So, Speaking of foolhardy manoeuvres, Mike, we're talking about what's happened with Cummings this week. I think
Big Dom, yeah.
Yeah, I think the story broke middle of last week, didn't it? I think that's when it first erupted. I think the Guardian and the Mirror were breaking the story. So, for anyone who's not completely familiar, I mean, like I say, this seems to affect even everyday people. The story is basically that Boris Johnson's chief advisor, the guy who effectively claims that he won the Brexit referendum single-handedly, and definitely assisted with winning Boris Johnson his majority. He is the most trusted man by far in the Johnson government, even upsetting his other cabinet ministers. But the story is that during the lockdown, and we're talking about the most serious part of the lockdown, i.e. the start, where there was no ifs or buts. You stayed in the house except once a day for exercise, or you had an urgent cause to do some care work, like delivering food or medicine to people, or collecting food or medicine for yourself. Those were the only reasons you were permitted to leave the house. If you look
to get food.
Well, as I said, collect good food for yourself. That would, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't listening to you. I already got bored of you. Go on. No, sorry. Carry on.
You were doing a good job.
So rude of me. I do apologise. You got my backup now for blaming me for hurting yourself. So, take what you get. But no, carry on.
You got an apology from me and an apology from Mike. We're on a roll here. So basically, yes, this advisor during the most serious part of the lockdown, if you can believe this, jumped in his car. So left his house, jumped in his car. Is I think a Land Rover. Jumped in his car with his wife, who was suffering from coronavirus symptoms. You might say, oh, there's a small chance it wasn't coronavirus. Yes, of course. But the guidance was, if you were suffering from any of the symptoms, you don't wait to get tested. You do not leave the house. You isolate in your house. So he jumped in a Land Rover with his infected wife, where he was almost certainly infected himself, being in close contact with her, obviously, and his young child. So they all jumped in a Land Rover. They didn't drive down the road. They drove all the way up the country, 264 miles, I think, to Durham, where his parents lived. And again, the story is very unclear here. It seems to change from whoever, week to week, what the actual story is. Originally, it was claimed he drove there for emergency childcare, because the logic was, oh, well, if we were taken so ill that we couldn't get out of bed, how could my toddler have been looked after? Well, I think he's 5 years old. To which you then probably rightly question, well, what about all the other people in the country that had the same problem? So he drove there initially for childcare. Then the story changed and it wasn't childcare, because, of course, the other question that raised is, why are you driving, almost certainly with coronavirus, to the other end of the country to be with your parents who are in a vulnerable age group for coronavirus? And then the story slightly changed, and it was, I went there because my parents' house is so big that I could stay in a separate part of it without ever having to come into close contact with my parents, looking after the kid, presumably just him and his wife, which then contradicts why he initially said he had to drive up there. The story then evolved even more. There were witnesses who said that they'd seen him at Barnard's Castle, which was another place 30 miles, I think, down the road, like a couple of weeks later, which again was against lockdown procedure rules. And yeah, so the interesting thing is, obviously there's a huge song and dance about this, quite rightly, and the way that this affects ordinary people, Mike, which it wouldn't normally. Most people, they don't take the time to understand politics necessarily, but the reason this affected ordinary people is obviously people have been suffering quite a lot during this lockdown. Not so much me, but a lot of people, you know, people who've lost their jobs, people who are really struggling for income, people who are really struggling with mental health, people who are ill themselves and have to be cared for. And, you know, that's even before we get to the more serious and very profound stories. But those people, no matter how testing it has been, have stayed at home all the time other than their exercise, because they know that the police were supposed to stop people randomly and say, what are you doing? Where are you going? And they knew that they were doing it to save the NHS, save lives, etc., etc. What do you know about the story, Mike? What was your take when you heard this kind of story breaking?
Initially, like when anything like this happens, or there's some scandal, especially involving a politician, generally it's hard to know what to believe. So it depends on where you first hear about this. So is it, you know, someone comes in and goes, oh, did you hear about this? Or you see something on a paper. Then you ask yourself which paper. Or you see something online and which website is it? There's a fair degree of, I'm actually just going to wait for a little bit more to come out before I actually pay any attention to it. Because the way I see it is you kind of have to do that. It's because very rarely when something breaks like this do you ever get the full story straight away.
That's true.
So initially I was like, right, cool, we'll see what happens. Not that that doesn't mean that I didn't care or wasn't bothered or didn't have an opinion. Just thought I'd probably wait a little bit more to formulate my opinion. And actually, I fucking wish other people did that a little bit more. but that's you know, that's something else altogether, really.
Yeah.
I mean,
knowing what you know now, just on the information you have now.
Yeah, go on.
What do you make of it?
There's a few questions really that for me. Firstly, why would the story change? It's straight away that it makes you think you're lying. Somebody's lied at some point. Mm-hmm. You know, either somebody's lied then or they're lying now, or there's been some misinformation that's led to a mistruth being said. Might not be a lie, or might not be his lie. It may be. Honestly, you just don't know. But if you take the facts for what they are as we know them, you know, like you said, it raises a few questions. So if you take the childcare angle, are we saying there's no closer childcare than 300 miles away? I mean, there are key workers at the moment having to go to work that are having to find childcare arrangements. There are still, you know, places open. Schools, for example, are still looking after key workers' children.
Yeah.
There are some childcare facilities that are still open, doing things in a very strict or different controlled way. Are you saying that some fucking top dog, right? Probably the most influential. Yeah, I'd say probably at least top few influential people in the country, with regards to politics anyway. Couldn't get their kids looked after. So I think there were too many holes in the original story, which might be why it was changed. I don't know. I don't know, but yeah, I don't see how there's much of a leg to stand on. To be honest, I would love, and you know this, and you all know this. There's not much I enjoy more than to disagree with you, especially on political topics. Sometimes, as we know, I'll just, even if I agree with you, I'll pretend I don't. It's hard. It's hard to go to bat for the bloke, mate, to be fair.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know if you've. I don't know how much of the news conferences that followed that. So originally the story broke. Some of us,
working quite a lot.
Yes, Mike. So. Yeah, you never fail to remind people of that. It's not my. Did I ask to be furloughed? Just because I enjoy it doesn't mean that I asked for it. My job, unfortunately, my job is still furloughed. I'm lucky enough, hopefully, not to be at risk of losing it, but I am still furloughed because the lockdown hasn't been eased enough to be generating the work that my work relies on. So I am still furloughed.
And rightly so.
Yeah, thank you, because I don't want to put myself and other people at risk unnecessarily. Not that I don't eventually think getting back to work would be a good idea. I quite, there is a certain pride in earning the money. I guess.
You said that with a big fucking smile on your face. It's really hard to.
Well, at the moment, Mike, with all the shit that the government has put me and a lot of other people through, right now they're paying me free money. So,
hang on. Yeah, all right.
So, no, anyway, I don't know if you saw the recent developments on this, but the story, obviously, that was the initial story.
Yeah.
Lots of holes. We don't know what really went on. Since then, we had the first thing was numerous Conservative MPs were basically sent out to say, there's nothing to see here. Dominic's done nothing wrong. I think people should just stop making political things out of this. I think Grant Shapps particularly made a complete fool out of himself because he didn't really know the answer to any questions on daytime TV. And this is the harsh thing. They're sending, Grant Shapps, again, being a Tory, I no time for him. But as in terms of an MP or a minister, he's more competent than a lot of people. And he speaks quite well. So for them to just effectively send him out as a human shield, to basically be shot at, he doesn't have a clue what the answers are. He's just there to blindly defend someone who he doesn't even know the full story of. So that was the first tactic. Send a bunch of human shields out to take all the flak and hope it blows over. That didn't work. The flak built, mainly because it connected with people like yourself, Mike, average Joe. People saw that and said, well, you paint yourself as a man of the people. So so after the human shield thing, they realized that this was affecting the average Joe, and people were really angry. They were saying, hang on, what have I been doing all this for? What have I been suffering for? What have I been sick around my kids for? What have I been denied, seeing my parents seeing their grandchildren for the first time? In some cases, why have I been denied physically going to the funeral of family members or seeing them in their last moments because of lockdown procedures? Why have I done all that so the Prime Minister's special advisor can fuck off halfway up the country when he's almost certainly got coronavirus? So that expanded the story. And I don't know if you saw it, but yesterday, Boris Johnson finally, although it looked like he had to be dragged out to do it, he held a press conference asking for questions to clarify the Dominic Cummings situation. And again, you know, Mike, I'll hold my hands up. You know that I'm not a fan of Johnson's politics or himself as a human being.
No.
So we'll put that out there. So, you know, you can take my words with a pinch of salt. If you're a Johnson fanboy, then just ignore what I'm saying. But
I would take his words with a pinch of salt, but not necessarily ignore them. I would say that.
What the important thing is, I acknowledge my bias. So go through the bias filter, but look at what I'm saying. So Johnson turned up. He looked like he didn't
I'll help to filter.
Yeah, he looked like he didn't want to be there. He was asked a number of very pertinent questions. Things like, did Dominic Cummings tell you he was doing this? When did he tell you? Did you give him permission to do this? Did your medical advisors say that this was something he was allowed to do? If Dominic Cummings didn't do anything wrong, then why do the general public think they're not allowed to leave their houses for things like childcare? And then, of course, you had the further accusations. Why would he visit Barnard's Castle, whatever the place is called, a few days later, when again it was expressly forbidden to leave the house except for local exercise or getting food or medicine? These things. And Johnson managed to do a combination of evading all the tough questions, blatantly lying about some of the questions. And I think the most staggering thing about it all was not only did he, I think this is the funniest thing about him, Mike, is, again, I'm speaking as someone who takes an interest in politics, but for the average Joe, they probably don't think about it too deeply. They see something that's not right. They see someone doing something that they've not been allowed to do when they were told everyone was doing it. But the way I looked at it is, if you look at it from a political strategy perspective, this was really quite easy to deal with this for Johnson, right? From a political perspective, all he would have had to do was go in front of the cameras and say, I've spoken to Dominic, he's explained the situation, I think he's an honourable man and he did this for the right reasons, but he still contravened the guidance, and I've told him in no uncertain terms that what he did was wrong and he won't do it again. We're very sorry the impression this creates. Even, you know, you could even add, he wasn't given permission for this because I didn't hear about it until afterwards. He felt it was too urgent to let me know. Anyway, moving forward, we don't think it's right for him to have to resign. He can retain his position, but he has been suitably admonished, and going forward will behave more in line with official guidance, right? If he'd have said something like that.
I'll stop you there.
Okay.
Do you think that would have been enough? Do you really think that would have been enough?
I think it would have. I think if you're saying to me,
if you're
saying, hang on, enough for who though? Enough for me, obviously not. Enough for.
There you go.
I'm vehemently opposed to the government on everything, but what we're talking about is the average everyday Joe and Jane who are going about their everyday lives.
You mean the fucking low IQ, entitled people of the world that look at authority, look down. Well, I can't look down on authority, can I? But generally hate. Like, no, absolutely not. No, should lose his job. That's it.
Oh, you mean, yeah. So that's what I mean.
They wouldn't accept, like, oh, we told him he's a very naughty boy. That would no.
No, but the difference is, Mike.
I'm not saying that's my opinion.
No, but the difference is, I think it would have diffused things enough. Would it have placated everyone? No, of course it wouldn't have. But would it have placated enough people so there wasn't a mass, like a critical mass of people who were furious? The average everyday Joe, who would normally have maybe supported Johnson, would have seen that and gone, didn't handle that very well, but he's been read the right act. We'll move on. I think enough people would have done that.
You think?
I think it would have diffused it. I can't think of a worse way of dealing with it than the way he did, which was to effectively, again, if anyone hasn't seen this, Johnson effectively turned to the camera. This was the worst thing. Amongst the things he said, ignore the lies, ignore the Cummings is my advisor and I'm sticking by him. Ignore that. That's par for the course for Johnson. But two really interesting things that happened. Johnson implied that the Durham police were lying. So the government implied that the police were not honest, because Durham police said they had spoken to either Dominic Cummings or members of Dominic Cummings' family. Dominic Cummings then denied that any police had spoken to any member of his family, and Johnson basically backed him up on that. So Johnson effectively implied that the police were lying. That was one. And two, the way that Johnson phrased his defence of Cummings was to say, amongst other things, he acted in the way that any decent father would, which of course implies that anyone who didn't leave their house and drive across the country to drop their kids off with their parents who lived in a mansion or even just another house are basically not decent enough parents. They're not smart like Dom. You see what I mean? I'm sure he didn't think that through, but that's exactly what he implied in the press conference.
I find it quite surprising that on a topic such as that one, that that he would say something like that. It's a bit stupid, really, isn't it?
I think he even used the words integrity. He said Dominic. This was the thing. He not only did he deny that Dominic Cummings had done anything wrong at all, he actually said he'd acted within the guidelines, and he used the words with integrity. I mean, can you imagine a more just tone-deaf way of dealing with a situation like that? Not to acknowledge anything, not to say, oh, mistakes have been made. This is not a good situation. We're sorry it happened. Not even to do that, but to turn around and effectively gaslight the public and say, there's nothing to see here. What are you talking about? He was being perfectly right.
Yeah, I think it's right. So I think the first thing he had to do is decide, does he lose his job or not?
Yeah.
If he decides not, he can't come out and admit, or it makes it can't come out and say, it was all wrong, everything, because then if people will come back and say, well, if that isn't cause for dismissal from particularly his position, then I don't know what is. If he's decided he's keeping his job, then he didn't really have much choice. I mean, he could have done it better, yes, than to try and defend him.
I see what you're growing.
You can't throw him out to the wolves and then go, yeah, better keep his job.
I mean, you say that, but I mean, there is precedent for it. I mean, look at Priti Patel. You know, she's had multiple bullying cases against her. She's being sued, I believe, by a former member of the civil service, taken to court about his treatment by her, and yet she's kept her job. So there is precedent for someone doing something outrageous and you saying,
outrageous to who? Outrageous to who?
Okay, this is the interesting thing, Mike. You do come at it with a fresh perspective, and I see what you're saying. I'm looking at it from a political perspective, and the political perspective is that Johnson can't do without Cummings. That's what this is about. I mean, if you look at it with cynical eyes, as in reading between the lines, the point is, with what you're saying, which is completely right, he makes a decision first of all. He looks at the facts and then he decides, is he keeping his job or not? And then from there, everything else works from there. But the point is, and this is what people are saying, and this is what I believe, is that Johnson doesn't think he can function without Dominic Cummings. And that's where this has come from. So rather than looking at the facts and saying, no, the right thing is for him to keep his job, I think what's happened is he's looked at the facts and said, I don't want to lose Cummings. I can't lose Cummings. So therefore, I'm going to say whatever it takes to make sure he doesn't lose his job.
Or has he looked at it and said, the best thing for the country? He obviously believes in, whether you believe it or not, he obviously believes that he is the right person for his job. And if he believes he does his job that much better with Big Dom, then it's also going to be his belief that keeping him around in his position is the best thing for the country.
It's a very interesting take, Mike. I'll give you that. You really tested logic with some good points. I don't necessarily agree with them, but they're very well made. That's definitely a take on it. I mean, if Johnson genuinely, like you say, if Johnson has a sense of honor and duty behind all the lies and whatever else, then you're right. Maybe he did look at it just completely black and white. I can't function without Dominic Cummings, and then if I can't function, then the country can't function. So he has to keep his job. So yeah, maybe you're right about that. Maybe it is. Just to develop it even more, then, Mike. I don't know again if you saw this. Probably not, if you've been a bit busy today. But Dominic Cummings himself actually did a press conference earlier today.
No, I've not.
Not long before we've recorded this. Now, you might think, oh, I see why that's happened. This is pretty unprecedented. Like, Dominic Cummings is a political advisor. Advisors do not do press conferences about political things because they're not politicians. There's no reason for them normally to ever do a press conference. Why this has happened is because there's been complete outrage over Johnson's conference. I don't know if you've seen this, but if you look in the newspapers, Twitter, whatever, you've got doctors, legal professionals, clergy, general members of the public, obviously other politicians, that goes without saying, all calling for Dominic Cummings to resign or be fired. Like really, really esteemed members of society saying this is outrageous, he needs to lose his job. So Johnson has obviously gone back to him and said, Dominic, I don't think that worked. It looks like the headline's going to be even worse tomorrow. And he said, okay, why don't I make a speech? And the interesting thing about the speech really was it didn't really add anything to the story. He admitted that he went to Barnard's Castle. So he's admitted that he drove to Durham, and he's admitted that he went to Barnard's Castle as well.
Wise, because you couldn't really deny it.
Well, eventually someone would probably find some footage. Yeah, I mean, I think there's already been a witness who said that they noticed his car number plate in Barnard's Castle.
Yeah, I've seen there some eyewitnesses or something. So
yeah, but the other interesting thing about him, Mike, is with his explanation. Right? So it was the usual bollocks. Like he didn't really offer any clarity on what we've already heard. It's all very fishy. Like you look at everything he says, where he says, "Oh, it's all logical." That was the way I was thinking, and each part of it, you just look at and think that doesn't make any sense in the real world. And I think the one that stood out for the stupidest explanation that he gave was he was asked why he went to Barnard's Castle, because Barnard's Castle is the big one. So the 264-mile drive up to Durham, that was outrageous. He's effectively transported coronavirus to the other end of the country. He's been a super spreader on purpose. But if you accept that he was desperate for his kid to get care or whatever, even though that story changed, you could just about put that to one side and go, I don't like it, but I'll accept it. It's the Barnard's Castle trip that's the big one, because that's nothing to do with childcare. And also, that was expressly against coronavirus guidelines. You do not leave the house for sightseeing, which it was. Now, he gave an explanation, something about, one of his explanations was when he was seen in some woods, he said, oh, that was on the private land of my parents' estate, which says something. But the Barnard's Castle trip, he said in his explanation, he went to Barnard's Castle because it was a half-hour drive. He said he went there to test his eyesight because he wasn't sure whether his eyesight was good enough to make the drive home. Now, just think about that a minute. Who tests their eyesight by jumping behind the wheel of a car and driving half an hour? By the way, he had his kid in the car as well.
Yeah,
testing your eyesight.
Let's endanger them as well, to be fair. Yeah. If I'm not sure, stick the kid in there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? If my eyesight fails, we'll crash.
Right. So I didn't see it. I didn't hear it from the horse's mouth. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But if that is, and the way that he said it is accurate, and I'm to believe you what you're saying there, and I find it hard. But for good reason. The reason is that he is clearly, by anyone's standard, an intelligent man.
Yeah.
Now, intelligent men obviously do and say stupid things. We are human.
I thought you were going to say we have evidence of that.
Well, I like to think we're also evidence of that, to some degree. But clearly a very intelligent man. That sounds like an incredibly stupid comment for anyone to say. I mean, there are people I know who I care for. They are brilliant people, but aren't particularly sharp. And even from them, I would find that incredibly stupid. And this man is arguably the most powerful political figure, certainly backseat political figure in the country.
Yeah.
Say something that comes across anyway as that ridiculous, it kind of makes you think, hang on a minute, why is Boris so keen on him keeping his job? Well, other people may look at that and go, the bloke's a fucking idiot then. Hang on, please can we remove him? Because what the fuck? If this guy, right, is advising the Prime Minister, we're all fucked. So, that's not necessarily my opinion, but if you're going to say something like that, fuck me.
It does make you think, doesn't it? Well, that's where I come to. I mean, we're probably going to wrap up in a minute, Mike. So if we come to the crux of the matter is, so I would argue that, you know what we said earlier, that Johnson is basically desperate to hold on to him. He obviously thinks he must retain Dominic Cummings at all cost. So I put it to you that there's only two possible reasons that could be.
Right.
So, number one is Johnson is incapable of leading the country. Now, you know, people who love him might have another opinion, obviously, but judging by the evidence of most of our own eyes, Johnson, through most of his life, has proven to be something of a dilettante. He's clearly a pathological liar. His own family and friends.
He's a politician, Aaron.
I mean, more than most. If you speak to members of his own family and friend circle, they'll say he's lazy, he doesn't focus, he doesn't like detail, he likes being the centre of attention, but he doesn't like the hard graft. So it's very easy to think, he desperately needs Dominic Cummings to grapple with the detail, to give him a clear message. to help clear his head and think of the ways forward on various things. And of course, Dominic Cummings, he effectively won. Well, he claims he won the Brexit referendum. He certainly had a big impact on it. And Johnson sees that as the reason he is Prime Minister. I'd agree with that. So he's obviously got a lot of loyalty. So that's number one. So do you think that that's the reason? That's the major reason? Or do you think, and again, let's also temper this with the political cost of keeping him, because this story is not going to go away. I'd argue it's only going to get bigger over the next couple of days. So
is loyalty then something that we should frown upon?
Well, hang on, let me finish though.
Go on.
Number two, this is the other possible reason.
Go on.
And this is one I definitely believe, or is very plausible. Dominic Cummings knows where the bodies are buried.
Really?
He has a lot of compromising information, particularly on Johnson.
Undoubtedly, but yeah.
And if you look at what kind of man Dominic Cummings is from his experiences, when we see him in the press and whatever, he's very, very arrogant. He doesn't like the media. He doesn't. He doesn't. Well, no, I'd agree with that. But what I mean is, he doesn't like the media holding him to account either. But he doesn't like authority. He definitely thumbs his nose at authority, as we can see with these actions. Now, so anyway, he would not think twice if he lost his position. Because remember, his position, I don't think he's a money grabber. I think he's in this position because he wants to be able to remake Britain in his image as much as he can. He wants to remake the state, he wants to remake the civil service, this kind of thing. He basically wants a project to remake the country. Now, if he loses that position, he's not the kind who's going to be very respectful. He will unleash all of that information he has.
You think so?
I think that's the most likely.
Despite, okay, that's quite a strong opinion you have of someone you don't actually know.
Well, again, we need to temper this through the fact that I'm a bit of a political anorak and I read all kinds of stuff. So I do know a lot about Dominic Cummings. But
yeah, I mean, but to say he's that much of a snake in the first place is quite a big statement. But also to assume that he would act that way on the back of his own, if he was to be dismissed, it would be entirely of his own making.
Yes.
He knows full well that Boris would have done it out of necessity, not because he wanted to. His hand would have been forced, and yet he would still throw him under the bus, even though he gave him no choice. You really think he's that unreasonable?
Yeah, I think he is. If you look at his background, Mike, Dominic Cummings is not a Conservative. He's not a Conservative Party member. He's actually spoken out against the Conservative Party. It's on record. He's spoken out against them. He has no time for the civil service. He's got no time for a lot of these people. He wants to be in charge. If he loses his position, I would wager he would take a lot of people down with him. Johnson would probably be the number one. I say that because no matter how powerful Cummings thinks he is, he's not going to take down the Conservative Party because they've got an 80-seat majority. They're safe for another 4 years at least. Johnson is not safe at all. In fact, a lot of people think he'll be gone by the end of the year, whether Cummings sticks around or not. Johnson is just a failing prime minister. He's not getting anything right. But the more important thing is, why is Cummings being allowed to stick around? So that's what I put to you. One of those two things.
Well, I mean, to add to that, it's quite an interesting person to put in that position. You would have your chief advisor, especially for the Tory party, your chief advisor as someone who doesn't actually agree with much of your politics at all.
Yeah.
Does that not seem strange to you?
Well,
What's the reason he's there in the first place?
It's all about Brexit, isn't it? That's why he got the job. He got it because he was seen to be the driving force behind the Brexit referendum.
Even so, if you were Boris, and I fucking got shake his hand, buy him a beer, right? And thanks for helping us win that. You don't have to make him your chief advisor. You don't have to make someone you can't trust your chief advisor. Would you do that?
I think you're giving Boris Johnson a lot of credit, though. Remember, I mean, no matter what you think about his personality...
No, give him some credit.
No, but whatever you think about his personality, Mike, remember, Johnson is not like me or you. He's come from a background where he's never had to worry about anything other than, which university is he talking at, which position is he going to take up next. So he doesn't have the same interactions people like me and you would do. So you're at work, you know the staff members you get to trust and ones you can't trust, ones that you think are worth a promotion, ones you think, would this promotion actually do the company more harm than good, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Johnson has been so pampered in his life, like so little adversity to deal with, that he doesn't have that three-dimensional view of people. I think what he looks at is, has this person been good for my career or my life? Yes, then I need to reward them by, making them my advisor. And then, to me, the only other thing he would be considering is what's going to happen if I sack them. They know a lot. I don't want to sack them. Why would I want to do that? That's why I see him as he doesn't see this the way that some people who've been in the real world would see it, which is like, yeah, you've helped me, buddy, but you've really dropped a bollock here. You're not, you can't hang on. You've just made a complete mug out of the British public. You made a mug out of us. Take your pay off, retire or do whatever you want, but you're going to have to go. He doesn't look at it like that. He's looking at it as, I need to cling on. I'm only going to be able to do this with him as my advisor. And he's just like, and because he's so used to getting what he wants as well, I don't think you can underestimate that. Johnson, I mean. And again, this is where I go back to his background. This has nothing to do with his character, but your character is shaped by your background, isn't it? So if you go through life having everything kind of land in your lap, no matter what you do wrong, because we know Johnson's done wrong, it's on record. He's lied numerous times. He's been sacked for it. He's lost marriages, all kinds of things for it. But he keeps rolling on. He keeps getting lots and lots of well-paid gigs. He's managed to get his dream job of Prime Minister. So, his mentality about dealing with people like Dominic Cummings is going to be completely different from someone like me or you.
So are you saying that I would make a better Prime Minister than Boris Johnson?
I think this is the only case ever where I would suggest that you are deserving of any kind of high office. Have me as your advisor. What did we say in the beginning, Mike? I'm the Dominic Cummings to your Boris Johnson. Let's do it. Let's lead the country. So
I'm a bumbling buffoon. That's what you're saying.
You're there for the publicity and the food and and the glory and maybe the women. And I'll be there for doing all the intellectual heavy lifting and the machinations behind the scenes.
I'm not sure I like what you're insinuating there. Are you saying that I'm incapable of doing the intellectual heavy lifting? I'm not sure I like this. I know what your opinion is of Boris, and you are calling me...
Oh. Let's face it, Mike, you're a populist. And on that note, I don't think we can really have a resolution to this, but it's been good to discuss. You've made some really interesting points, actually, Mike. It's been good discussing this. It will be very interesting to see what happens, even by the time I've edited this, because it's a very fast-moving story. And if Johnson digs his heels in and doesn't sack him, this is going to just keep going, blowing up and up and up like a big balloon. But we will see. And
or something major will happen and the world will forget.
Or there's another major issue. Anyway, it's been a good lockdown large. So you're up for running again next week, Mike? Because presumably lockdown will still be here in some extent. I think there's going to be a loosening in the sense that they're expecting to open some schools.
Don't even that.
I've heard what I've heard, Mike, is that apparently from the 1st of June, i.e. beginning next week, they're looking to open most schools. A lot of them, I think, will oppose it because of safety concerns, but they're hoping to open most. Yeah, but you know, that's the decision. They want to open most schools, I believe, primary mainly. So most schools.
Reception year 1 and year 6, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, year 1 and 6 thing. And they are also, I think they said they're also potentially opening outdoor markets and car dealerships.
Yeah.
Assuming that they obviously adhere to social distancing and hygiene, etc. So there you go. So
that's a whole different. We could. That's a whole different fucking ball game. I'll tell you, I've got some opinions.
Yeah. Next week could look completely different. So we'll have a lot more to discuss. So it's been good to talk to you, Mike, as always, and we will grow each other next week. Thank you for listening. If you have listened, and stay safe. We'll see you next time.